Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. It is my pleasure to have Mr. Hugo Turner on the show. Hugo, how are you doing?
Good. Great to be on.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. Now, you penned several articles, but this one was particularly interesting on Ted Shackley. Ted Shackley, A Life in the CIA. Well, first of all, your website is Anti-Imperialist U?
Yeah, at blogspot.com.
Okay. And that's where you primarily write and post your stuff, your material?
Yeah.
Okay. Is anywhere else where people go to find your work, or?
Yeah, you can find my work at SOT and at Global Research as well.
Okay. And you've also penned a series of articles regarding Iran-Contra, which, of course, involves Mr. Shackley, which I urge people to go see those articles as well because they're relevant to what we're talking about tonight. And is anything else you've done that you want to mention, or that I'm missing, or?
I've written a lot of articles about different CIA operations that Shackley would be involved in or whatever.
Okay.
But they could just check out my site, or, do a search for Nazis in the CIA or Operation Gladio.
Okay.
Or Operation Condor, and you can find it.
All that nasty stuff, yes. So, you have this article, Ted Shackley, A Life in the CIA. Mr. Shackley, what does his life, his career in the agency, maybe after he left the agency, supposedly, what does it tell us about the United States, the American empire, and the world we live in today?
Well, basically, Shackley's career is sort of like a window onto like the dark hidden history of like the Cold War, and even like the roots of like what's going on now with like the war on terror, because Shackley was involved in like the CIA's most notorious operations, like the plot to assassinate Castro, the terror campaign against Cuba, drug smuggling in Laos. He worked with the Nazis in Germany, and he worked on the Phoenix program in Vietnam, and then he was like involved in Iran-Contra, the JFK assassination, and even like 9/11 was partly a result of like stuff he was involved in like far earlier in the 80s. So he like interconnects to all like the what Peter Dale Scott would call the deep events of the post-war period, and he is involved in all these ugly covert wars the U.S. was involved in. Basically, the lesson of Shackley's life is that the CIA has like complete impunity to do whatever it wants. It's just basically a criminal organization that's above the law, and the Congress and stuff like that is all just pretty powerless compared to the CIA.
Now, the fact that Ted Shackley shows up in all these supposedly disparate events, of course we know they're all connected, suggests that there's a relatively small group of people that are carrying out these things, correct? For another group of people, Wall Street, the banks, whatever, right?
Yeah, there's not just Shackley, but like what Daniel Sheehan called the secret team, which is like all his friends that from these different operations or whatever. And yeah, basically of the really dirty operations the CIA is involved in, like drug dealing or support for terrorism and things like that, they only there's a small group of people that are know the darkest secrets, and Shackley is definitely he was a leader of these people. And
I guess many of those secrets went to the grave with him, perhaps, right?
Definitely, because he was very secretive. Some of these guys, like Thomas Klein, sort of had big mouths and would say stuff, but Shackley, he just kept everything. He's very good at covering his tracks and concealing his role.
Now, how did Shackley? I believe he was born in 1927, and he was from his perspective, unfortunately, too young to go to World War II. Some people say he was fortunate to miss that. So he's born in 1927. He's of Polish background.
Yeah, his mother was Polish, and she was a Polish immigrant, but she pretended that she was born here. But Shackley learned Polish as a child from his grandmother, who was pretending to be his aunt. So it's his mother was sort of he got this secretive and deceptive quality from his mother. Mm-hmm. And his father was sort of this angry, mean guy. So those are Shackley's parents.
So is that his stepfather?
Well, his first father was like an angry drunk that his mother left, and then she remarried this rich guy in Florida that Shackley never got along with. He was forced to move in with his high school football coach.
Okay.
And then like after, like he said, he wanted to join the war, but it ended right before he graduated from high school, so he can go. But then like he did end up joining the military right after that, and then it was before the CIA was founded, but he was recruited into this thing called the CIC, this counterintelligence corps of the military,
and
that's where his career in intelligence began. So it's sort of like right out of high school, he's immediately into this secret world, and then like he's sent to Germany. He attends this top secret intelligence academy at Ammergau with all like these fascist instructors and like these notorious intelligence agents from around the world were being trained there in like psychological warfare and what they call special warfare and things like that. Basically like terrorism and propaganda, the school, the types of skills the CIA requires, and then he goes into college, and then he's recruited into the CIA when the Korean War starts.
That's 1950. This is so that's June, the summer of 1950, and so he is. Looking, he's 22, 23. That's pretty heady stuff for a young guy. I mean,
definitely.
To get thrown into that world.
Right out of high school, he's joining into this.
Yeah.
So he's like, oh.
And of course, he had a poor relationship with his father, sort of a distant or ambivalent stepfather. So you would kind of get a psychological makeup for this. This is that's prime material for intelligence agencies, at least from my understanding.
Yeah, in fact, the people in the CIA, they had this rumor that Shackley was like an orphan raised by the CIA because he was like so intense and into it. So
yeah,
he let him believe that because he wanted to know about like his mom or his drunk dad.
And you say he spoke Polish, so that was very useful particularly for most of the Cold War, but particularly in the early days of the Cold War, the high Cold War period, the 50s and early 60s. It also probably shaped his outlook, right? Because he's this Cold War warrior.
He also learned German.
German.
Yeah, I couldn't quite figure out when, but he also was very fluent in German. And in fact, some people, like Daniel Sheehan, claims that Shackley was the translator for Reinhard Gehlen.
Oh, okay.
Like this early period. But I don't know if that's really true or not.
Yeah. Of course, Gehlen was the head of the Eastern Intelligence for Germany. Of course, the Russo-German War, that horrible conflict in the East, and he was incorporated or recruited by the OSS after the Second World War. This was the Alan Dulles doing this, and he, I guess, for the most part, the Gehlen network formed the Soviet desk at the fledgling CIA. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, definitely. All like the spies that the CIA was relying on were all these actually Nazi collaborators and Nazis of the Gehlen organization. It wasn't just like he had like all the Germans, but then he also had all like the spies that the Nazis had been running during the war or whatever. So that was their only window into the world, was like what Gehlen was telling them, and that's like it was in Gehlen's interest that the Cold War would get started as quick as possible, because that would mean that America would become an ally of the Nazis, and they'd be worried about the Russians. So they were like hyping up the Russians big time and always lying and saying there was about to be like a Soviet invasion.
Mm-hmm.
So like all that Cold War hysteria was actually generated by these fascists.
Yes, and of course that helped the corporate interest back in the United States, because that served the justification for NSC 68 and the military-industrial complex and the military Keynesianism that would come to define post-war America, the economy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all that. I think it was. I forget who was it. I forget who said it, that if the Soviets weren't an enemy, that we would have had to create one to justify all the spending. It was. I guess it was Senator Vandenberg who told Harry Truman, when Harry Truman, proposed this to him. He said, "You got to scale the hell out of the American people, Harry." So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So he's in his early 20s. This is the Cold War period. This is the Korean War. This is the era of McCarthy. This is a very confusing time period because, again, what you're saying is now the United States is cozying up to the Nazis, or erstwhile, our enemies, and now our erstwhile allies, the Soviets, are the enemies. This is right out of George Orwell, isn't it? I mean, it's.
Well, yeah, of course, people like Allen Dulles were actually funding the rise of Hitler and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But some people in America were always allied with the Nazis.
Uh-huh.
The big industrialists and so on, a lot of them.
But when you get into this higher, because when you get into the Cold War itself, which I've come to kind of look at it as a kind of a strategy of tension writ large, where depending on what level you're on, you have a different view of the conflict. Whereas the whole first half of the 20th century was an attempt to kind of like consolidate and manipulate and change the world through warfare. And you got the First World War. The second act was the Second World War, and of course that leads to the Cold War. And all the while, you're getting these the industrial power, the industries, the banks are making money off all the warfare.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But a good example is you mentioned the Galen network, and the Galen network. So what I understand is he helped train the Mossad.
Like a Mossad guy went to that same school that I was talking about.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where some of these they all would meet, they met at this school, so it's sort of like this a special club of evilest secret agents from around the world, including Israel.
But
Israel is often allied with these fascists, ironically.
Yeah.
Like all the wacko countries, Israel was allied with Argentina and Taiwan and all these fascist type things.
Is now, of course, at Shackley's level, he's sort of is he a true believer, a soldier, or he's just kind of a?
I think he's like an American style of fascism, where it's just anti-communism. I don't know if he hated the Jews or anything, but he was just you have to. Whenever he saw poor people rising up anywhere in the world, or even environmentalism and stuff, he's like, these are terrorists, they're communists, we have to kill them. He was very much we got to eliminate all these subversives type of mentality. Yeah,
it was almost like whenever in Guatemala, Arbenz, he was first painted red to justify the coup for the benefit of United Fruit or something. And same thing with in Iran of all places, which where Mossadegh was then, because Mossadegh had run afoul of of British Petroleum, or I guess it was then it was Anglo-Iranian oil, but it became British Petroleum. But these the minute that some of these developing countries or resource-rich countries would governments would assert themselves, they'd be painted red, and there'd be a coup for the benefit of Wall Street or the City of London. That was the strategy. Same thing, even into the 70s with Chile, of course. As you mentioned, that Shackley's involved in all this. So.
Well, yeah, Shackley was in charge of it back in Washington, and he sent his right-hand man, Thomas Klein, down to personally handle this Chilean coup.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's one of his more notorious operations.
Now,
people should see this movie called Missing, which is about the Chilean coup that I watched a week ago. It's really a great movie.
Oh, with Sissy Spacek and Jack Lemmon.
Yeah.
Where that reporter is murdered during the '73 coup. Yeah. It is a good movie, actually. Yeah, got that creepy CIA guy. As far as because Shackley, he goes to Korea.
Oh no, he doesn't go. He goes back to Germany.
Okay, he's in Germany during the Korea. He's never in Korea. He's in Germany doing intelligence. Of course he speaks Polish fluently, and
he's put in charge of all of the satellite country desks. Basically, so he's this meteoric rise because he makes friends with his first mentor is William Harvey, a notorious CIA guy who started out in the FBI and would later be in charge of the Castro assassination plot with the mafia or whatever, DR rifle. And so with Harvey liked him because he wasn't from an elite background like a lot of these other CIA guys.
That's right. He went to University of Maryland, correct?
Yeah.
Not Yale or Princeton or something,
He could have gone to Princeton, but he chose to go to University of Maryland to be with his best friend from high school, obviously. So with Harvey's help, he has this meteoric rise, and he's put in charge of all of the Eastern European countries. They're not Soviet, all the Warsaw Pact ones, like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary, etc. and so his next major role is in, after the failure of the Bay of Pigs, he's put in charge of Operation Mongoose, or like at least he's the chief of station in Miami that's in charge of it, with like Harvey as his boss, and then RFK like kind of overseeing the whole thing.
So he's like rubbing elbows with Lansdale and those guys.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Like Lansdale was like the mastermind, sort of. Like Lansdale was like a ad man, and he would just brainstorm a bunch of ideas that like half of them were completely insane and impractical, and then so the CIA is more of a bureaucracy. Like, you know, they're working on what they're working on. They're not going to drop everything because Lansdale decides on some crazy scheme or something. So he was sort of out of this. He wasn't as influential anymore by the 60s as he had been in the 50s.
Mm-hmm. And Lansdale, some say, wasn't he the model for the Quiet American?
Oh, he was, yeah.
Yeah.
And the Ugly American.
And the Ugly,
yeah.
Oh, yeah, the Ugly American. Yeah, Marlon Brando, yeah. The Graham Greene, the Quiet American. Because in the 50s, now, prior to, overt American involvement, you had the OSS, then CIA, at least from my understanding, kind of nudging the French out, and largely to take over the heroin trade. But then by the 1960s, you get the escalation in Vietnam, and where the CIA kind of steps in, but also kind of hands it off to the Pentagon to turn it into a full-scale war.
Yeah, basically the CIA. Well, it started during the OSS were in Vietnam during the war, and they were actually working with the Viet Minh. But then after that, they sided with the French. But then another people like Lansdale, who knew the French were going to lose, they were, you know, trying to build up their like South Vietnamese puppet government, like Diem. And so they installed Diem in there, and then he was basically a fascist who had this brutal crackdown. But back home, he was told, you know, we have to protect this democracy in South Vietnam. There was no democracy. He was a brutal dictator or whatever, and his like brother-in-law was a gangster in charge of the heroin trade, like you were saying. So, Shackley wouldn't go to Vietnam until after the Tet Offensive, but.
Oh, so Shackley's physically not in Vietnam until after 1968.
Yeah, he goes there in '68, but he'd been in Laos, like from '65 to '68.
Oh, so there he's like recruiting or mobilizing among people. Of course, to do that he has to make all types of alliances, which involves the drug trade, right? And this is where he teams up with Richard C. Cord, later of Iran-Contra infamy.
Yep, and all those Iran-Contra people, a lot of them were in Laos. And they're all like David Morales, and Richard C. Cord was like he was the Air Force liaison to like the secret war in Laos. And at one point, Shackley had Richard C. Cord bomb this rival drug syndicate to like Vang Pao, the leader, the general of the Hmong, so that Vang Pao could win this drug war. So he basically calls in the American Air Force as part of like a war over a drug turf war.
Mm-hmm. So he's using American air power to empower one cartel against another.
Yeah. Well, both of them were, like the other ones were like the KMT that like the CIA had also been working with since like the 40s, basically, or even before there was a CIA. These Chinese nationalists had been dealing drugs, but they had to make sure that Vang Pao got all the profits from Laos so that he could fund the secret war, basically. Mm-hmm. So that's why they bombed the KMT.
And of course, with the KMT, Kuomintang Party, there's this remnant force that was funded by the heroin trade, and the CIA always had some sort of idea of using that to sort of harass or cause Red China problems, right? That was the idea.
They were sort of like the original Contra. They're funded through drugs, and they're like waging guerrilla war on communist China.
They were in Burma, right? Some sort of remnant force in Burma? Yeah.
They're in Burma and in Taiwan and like all over the place, really. Mm-hmm. And there's actually the money from the heroin that the KMT was selling was going to fund Joe McCarthy to create all this hysteria. So like the part that wasn't caused by the Nazis was caused by like these Taiwanese drug money funding all these funding the whole Red Scare just basically because it was like in these people's interest.
That's really interesting because you get so much intrigue there because you have with McCarthy because you had elements within the national security state going against McCarthy.
Well, yeah. Once McCarthy decided to investigate the CIA,
well, that's what's interesting.
By McCarthy,
because what was my thing is, was he going to reveal the family jewels too early? And so I'm thinking, what was it because they thought McCarthy was a danger to freedom? I don't think the CIA worried about that.
No, first he was like a useful tool, but then once he started to like trying to mess with Allen Dulles himself, it's like no.
That's what's funny, yeah. Because I mean, if you look at McCarthy and the whole communist thing is that the people are identifying some sort of penetration or threat in an organization, and indeed it does exist, but the true meaning of it is unclear. If you look at it, you have this Dulles faction, which is pro-Nazi. This is right after World War II, and you have this.
McCarthy was also pro-Nazi, by the way. Like,
yeah,
that's who was feeding him all his intelligence and all these.
Oh, these communists were.
Two commies were like
yeah.
McCarthy's kind of mentality.
But then you have the foundations, the Reese Committee hearings and the foundation funding of the Institute for Pacific Relations, and the fact that Mao himself had been educated by Yale Divinity School. And the intrigues of the OSS in China actually supporting Mao at some point because perhaps they saw him as a way to destabilize China. We see it today, what China's become. It's sort of this unfolding plan.
I think it was probably because, of course, the communists were the ones who were fighting the Japanese, not like the nationalists were just trying to like stockpile weapons for when they had to fight the communists after the war.
Yeah, yeah.
They were allied with these groups that were communists during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mao was now like an American puppet, basically.
Mm. well, it's too big and bulky, but I'm saying he's certainly a. If you look at it,
the Americans that were more concerned about fighting the Japanese during the war hated like the nationalists because they were just like all they cared about was making money off the drug traffic. they didn't want to, and they were perfectly willing to like. That's why one of the reasons the communists won after the war was because after the Japanese surrendered, the nationalists recruited all like the Chinese that had been traitors and from the Japanese, and they also were even working with the Japanese troops themselves right after World War II. And they like for 2 years, the Japanese were used to fight the communists in China with like, and there was actually like hundreds of thousands of American troops in China fighting this war, and like nobody remembers this.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's right. So what you have Claire Chennault, the Flying Tigers, and these things. So it was because that was even before Pearl Harbor, so it was illegal, and that was also funded by heroin, from what I understand.
Oh, absolutely.
So this goes back to the late 30s. These networks, and of course this involves the development and growth of the CV Star Insurance Company, which became AIG.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thing that most people don't know. But yeah,
because so all these corporate, you have these wars, but these wars, there's networks of trade and commerce and banking are being created that aren't going to go away when the war ends. They're going to want to persist and maybe.
Yeah, and Shackley meets up with all these people when he's in Miami. Doing the Castro thing, that's what he meets up with William Pauly, Desmond Fitzgerald, who's like Stevie Starr's partner.
Yeah.
And I forget.
And Stevie Starr's great nephew is Kenneth Starr.
Oh, I didn't know that. Unbelievable.
And Kenneth Starr is the one that focuses on Monica Lewinsky and not at Mena, Arkansas.
Well, yeah, Ken Starr was involved in like a bunch of dirty Iran-Contra related stuff.
Didn't he write that memo in 81 or 82, William French Smith memo, that kind of told the CIA that they could look the other way, get in legal cover? This is the run-up to the Contra War. I mean, we're jumping ahead now.
I think that was Ed Meese. Yeah, I think that was Ed Meese.
So, but I think it was Ken Starr actually wrote the memo.
Oh, cool.
So I mean,
yeah. He worked for Ed Meese.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I just learned about that like a week ago.
Yeah, I'm just saying. So there. Then you get this, AIG. Then you wonder why AIG was bailed out because Goldman. I mean, now we're getting way ahead of ourselves, but it's amazing.
Yeah, insurance, the mafia, huge financial crimes and stuff.
Yeah.
That's where like Shackley gets involved with like Paul Helliwell, and that was the third one name I was thinking of. Yeah.
So he's involved
when he's in Miami.
He's involved. So he gets involved. He's in Laos. He gets involved in the heroin trade. And of course, many people know what happened there. The heroin, it became the Vietnam War became a conduit to ship drugs back in the United States. And it also created a huge market because hundreds of thousands of troops became addicted to heroin.
Yeah, and it was the South Vietnamese generals that were, each general was sort of like the mob boss of their area, so they were the ones who were supplying this heroin to the U.S. troops that were getting addicted. It's just like, these are our allies.
Mm-hmm. And
of course, America totally looked the other way and didn't care and covered it up.
And this also coincides with Nixon's war on drugs, where he's shutting down the French connection, but at the same time, he's opening up the connection, I guess the pipeline from Vietnam, which is running through Mexico into Las Vegas, if I got that correct.
Yeah, and there's the Nixon war on drugs, which is probably one of the things that caused him to get Watergate out of office because of his war with the CIA.
Now, with it, so here we are in Vietnam, and this all that money has to be deposited somewhere, right? And they opened up this bank, right? This was it in Australia.
Yeah, Nugent, like that's sort of like in the period like when it's sort of ending. But yeah, as the Vietnam War is ending, they opened up this Nugent Hand Bank in Australia, which is this huge drugs and drug money laundering bank that's also used to finance like arms sales all over the world for what I call World War III, like the huge covert wars that are going on.
So it's like BCCI of the BCCI.
It was the original BCCI. Yeah, after Nugent Hand closed, that's when they had to open up the BCCI, and like Nugent Hand was actually a replacement for Castle Bank.
Okay, yeah. And Castle Bank was the one in the Bahamas, right?
Yeah.
And that was one Paul Helliwell set up with the Vatican.
Paul Helliwell, he was like working for Meyer Lansky and.
Yeah, and from what I understand, Paul Helliwell also played a very instrumental role in helping Disneyland get built, or Disney World. Was it Disneyland or Disney World?
That's right.
Yeah, and that goes to, was it Donovan's law firm or something, some weird deal. That's even weird because if you look back at the history of Disneyland in Florida, it broke ground in 1953, 54, the same year that MK Ultra got started. And both in both enterprises, MK Ultra and Disneyland, SRI was involved in that. You know.
Interesting.
So I I guess we could look at Disney and say that it's an next.
Well, when I think of Disney, I think of MK Ultra.
Exactly.
It's like brainwashing.
It's like the
brainwashing America's children.
Yes.
And like whitewashing, like Disney's like what Disney does to like fairy tales is sort of like what America does to history. They just like
there you
take
go.
out
That's
all
right.
the interesting parts, all the grown up parts, and just having this like kind of like sweet innocent tale. It's like, oh, we just want to spread freedom and democracy.
Yeah. And so Paul Helliwell, because when I interviewed, I talked to Pierce Redmond about that. He did a thing. We had a whole show talking about Disney and CIA. I thought it was a wonderful, well, if anything, just looking into that relationship tells you all about America. America really is kind of an amusement park, you know.
Actually, I did an interview with Pierce Redmond about Ted Shackley.
Oh yeah, I've listened to it. I got it.
Cool.
Good interview, yeah. But yeah, it's it's one of those things where SRI, MK Ultra, Disney, and Disney Corporation. But yeah, the Castle Bank, where again that was used, and that I guess that involves was that the Mary Carter Paint Company, and they built Resorts International down there.
Yeah, and then it was all connected with Traficante, who was like all the Cubans that Shackley was using. They were like Traficante monsters, and then like Traficante was losing all the heroin that was coming out of Vietnam and Laos. So,
and you mentioned that Santo Traficante, he wasn't Italian. His name was patron saint of traffickers or something. Santo.
Yeah, it's like a fake name that means basically like saint of traffickers. It's not his real name. I think he's like kind of Middle Eastern or something. I don't know. I forget exactly what he is, but I know he's not Italian.
And he was the one that they thought was he's either a double or a triple agent with Castro, right?
It's not that he may have been betraying, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, well, just covering because I think his concerns weren't bothered by Castro or something. He had some deal struck in Cuba or something indicated.
Well, like he was actually all his people were the ones waging the war, but I think at the same time, who knows? But like it doesn't have to be Traficante that was betraying stuff because like he was just obviously if you have like all these exiles, it was very easy for the Cubans to like send fake exiles into join all these different organizations.
Yes. Yeah.
So they knew what was going on, and the Cuban community was like famous for like bragging about everything they did and having terrible security. So you could just have some Cubans sitting in a bar or something, and you'd overhear all this what they were planning to do, everything they've done, and you know. And they trained all the Americans later found out like the agents they thought they had in Cuba had all been doubled by the Cubans.
Mm-hmm.
That was like the 80s or 70s, I think.
And in Nuke in Hand, is it 1980 that the bank shuts down? Is it that late?
Yeah. Frank Nugan is found dead. The Australian businessman, his partner escapes. Like the secret team goes in. They find like William Colby's name in Frank Nugan's pocket, whatever. I think that was because they didn't like Colby.
And this is like five years after he testifies during the church committee hearings, and he spills.
Yeah, he revealed the family jewels, and they thought it was like he told way too much, even though he didn't. It was really a super good cover up on Colby's part. It was like an excellent limited hangout. Like,
yeah.
Appreciate that.
but so to stick it to him, they put his card just so he gets a lot of bad press or something in the guy's body.
Yeah, there was a feud between Colby and Helms or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And I guess there was, because he succeeded Helms. That's right. And it was Helms. I guess it was Nixon's conflict with Helms, which I think you could argue led to Watergate, because the first whiff of that I got was when I read Russ Baker's book, about the Bush dynasty. Although it's worth it's about so much more than just the Bush dynasty, but. The whole intrigues of Watergate and the Kennedy assassination, and again, if you read that book, have all the.
High on my reading list, but I haven't gotten to it yet.
Oh, really? Okay, well, yeah.
I've heard like a 10-hour interview with Russ Baker that's talked about a lot of it.
Yeah.
I also believe that Nixon was brought down by the CIA, who intentionally got caught, so that they could like basically bring him down because he was doing, he recognized China, he was doing détente, and they were like, we need to get rid of this guy. And plus, he was messing with the CIA and messing with the drug routes and stuff like that.
Yeah, and he thought he was president, I guess, and that's.
Any president thinks that they can like single-handedly run foreign policy is not going to come to a good end. Or anyone, there's that whole period between 1960 and 1980 where all like Kennedy's killed, LBJ has to resign early. Nixon is brought down by Watergate. Ford only gets one term. Carter's taken down by Shackley and Bush. And then with Reagan, it's like they decide never to mess with the CIA again. And after that, it's just sort of like there's no more scandals or investigations. It's just sort of like they get away with it from then on.
Well, yeah. Well, Reagan happened to be.
I mean, there is the scandal of Iran-Contra, but they decide, not to like make it into a Watergate. And
that's right. Yeah.
Get away with it.
And of course, Reagan happens to be shot by a.
And everyone at the time is like, if we don't get these covert operations under control, like our whole country is going to be screwed. There's going to be a huge bloodbath. Like you read what they were saying at the time of Iran-Contra, and it's just like it was totally true because like they didn't fix it, and then 9/11 happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's like, and then they put in all the plans that they had during the Reagan era for like mass surveillance and detention without warrant and all that stuff, and they passed it all, and now we live in that.
Oh yeah. The
police state world.
There was the Rex 84 or something that was revealed when I think it was Jack Brooks of Texas, kind of naive.
Well, that was part of it. The plan to like round up all the immigrants and lock them in camps or whatever, and possibly peace protesters too, in the event of a war on Nicaragua, which they were planning to have happen. It was like, it was this false flag operation that they were planning to use to justify the war in Nicaragua that actually caused the CNN investigation, because first they killed this Contra leader, Eden Pastora, with a bomb, and they tried to blame it on the Sandinistas, and then they were going to plan to kill the American ambassador, Louis Tams, and then they were going to use that as the excuse to invade Nicaragua, but it was all like exposed.
Well, it kind of shows you how bad things have gotten since then, because at least there was some resistance.
Yeah, the Iran-Contra scandal was like sort of the last gasp of any kind of like criticism of like just like blatant imperialism. Like now the Democrats are they're just lockstep with the Republicans. They're not like, we need to stop doing this. They're just like, we need to do more.
Now, as far as Shackley goes, in the 70s, the Vietnam War ends, Nugan Hand Bank is shut down, Bill Colby's name is mentioned in the press.
Well, like the Nugan Hand, it was going between 75 and 80. It was financing all these scandalous things like in Iran and in Central America and,
Okay, this would have been so. Now we have a situation. It's kind of the late 70s. Vietnam War is over.
And Afghanistan, no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah, and 78, 79. Now, of course, with the election, as far as Shackley's career goes, he comes back in the 70s, and he has sort of I guess he's eyeing the directorship of the CIA because his friend George Bush is there. He's ensconced in there in 76 under Ford, but then Carter wins the election in 76. And
that's like a disaster for Bush and Shackley. Like Bush has Russ Baker, or like as he said in the interview, he's like Bush begged Carter to let him stay on as the CIA director, and Carter's like no. And Carter wanted to reform the CIA, and it damaged Shackley's career. He wasn't actually fired. He later quit, but he was like when Bush was DCI, Shackley had been director of all covert operations. He was the assistant officially, but like his boss is more of a figurehead. And all these terrorist attacks happen. Like they blow up this Cuban airliner, kill 73 people. They like kill Orlando Letelier in downtown Washington D.C.
That's right. The car blows up and kills Ronnie Moffat, the girl, the woman. And no one's ever tried for it. This is all part of Condor, isn't it?
Yeah. Which it involved with like the coup that Shackley had set up in Chile.
Mm-hmm. And now, so the Nugan Hand is funding these type of operations, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so that's the money for it. Now this is now in 70s. So in the late 70s, Shackley's kind of brushed aside in CIA. He decides to quote retire and pursue life in the private sector. But this brings in the era of this is the Safari Club, because this is after the Church Committee hearings and the Rockefeller Committee hearings, and so the CIA's gotten a lot of bad press, and supposedly they've been neutered. They can't do as much as they used to do, so they got to do things under the cover. So this organization this private intelligence network opens up because all these. Well, is it the Saturday Night Massacre, or the October Halloween Massacre they call it, when Carter fired all these guys, hundreds of these agents, and so they're not going to go quietly into the night, and so they kind of regroup and they form this private club with other countries like Saudi Arabia, South Africa. It's called the Safari Club, I guess, because they meet in Africa, I guess, and they decide to conduct their own intelligence, and this is sort of the basis for what we see now is sort of a private intelligence network that's even more out of control, I guess.
Yeah, like Safari Club is one of it's like two separate things. It's like a huge private off the books CIA that's like loyal to George Bush that Shackley is running, and then also Shackley is also running the Safari. As part of that, Shackley is also the liaison to the Safari Club, which is America's alliance with France, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Egypt, Morocco, and Iran before the Shah falls. And it's actually out of the Safari Club that Al Qaeda is originated.
Okay, yeah, in Afghanistan.
Yeah, because after the first thing they do is they fund like the war in Angola illegally because like Congress had cut off funding for that, and then they move over into funding Afghanistan, like 77 and 78, I think is when the destabilization really began, and then by 79, Carter had authorized it, but it had begun 2 years earlier. Then, like, they basically provoked the Soviets into invading. And
and of course that's another Polish national, right, or Polish ethnic Pole.
Zbigniew Brzezinski, who had been recruited in the CIA by Shackley in the 60s, is now like risen to become like a Kissinger level type person planning American strategy.
Who I guess you could say who all work for the Rockefellers.
Yeah, they both work for the Rockefeller.
Yeah, so here we are in the late 70s, and I think what I gather from your interviews and what I've read is you tend to look at the Well, you have Carter, and you have the Iranian Revolution, and Khomeini comes to power. The Shah, abdicates, flees the country, and in your research, you seem to say that the CIA, or at least elements therein, Shackley's gang, set Carter up with that.
Yeah, basically, there's this Iranian researcher called Farah Mansour who did a bunch of he totally forced me to rethink the whole Iran revolution, which is after they overthrew the Shah, it wasn't inevitable that Khomeini would come to power, and the CIA chose Khomeini to come to power. Like what they'll say during the normal thing is they stop paying these mullahs on behalf of the CIA, but actually what they started paying them to overthrow the government instead of support the Shah, and then the Shah's overthrown, and they bring Khomeini in, and then there's that's called the Deep October surprise.
Yes.
And then after that, they make a secret deal. After the hostage crisis, they make a secret deal with the Iranians, and this is definitely confirmed, where they just agreed to hold on to the hostages so Carter would lose the election, and then they actually didn't release them until Inauguration Day. And people, for some reason, didn't find that suspicious. It's on the exact day of inauguration they released them because of the secret deal. It wasn't until Iran-Contra was exposed that people started look into this.
Mm-hmm. This is where Casey and Bush flew to France, I think, and met with the Iranians, and I guess the Israelis were part of this and transferring the weaponry. Because the backdrop of this is also the Iraqi-Iranian War, which the U.S. played a big part in fomenting, correct?
Yeah, and obviously it's related to Safari Club because Iran and Israel were part of that, and the Egyptian arms deals, and it's all one big arms trafficking network for all these different wars. And then, so they started selling arms to Iran and Iraq at the same time.
Uh-huh. And at the same time, of course, we had to take a couple steps back. This is the 78 Accords with Israel and Egypt set up this, I guess, this funding of weaponry and subsidies, which Ed Wilson went into business with his company Eastco, but he thought he was working for the CIA because he was working for Shackley and Klein's, but never got it in writing. So he got caught smuggling explosives to Libya, right? Which he went to prison for.
Yeah, he got framed for being a rogue CIA agent. Yeah, because he Wilson had become super rich or whatever by running CIA front companies, and Shackley had asked him for a $100,000 loan that he was just made clear that he wasn't ever going to pay it back. It's one of these things these crooked people do is they give each other fake loans and stuff.
Yes.
If you know Daniel Hapsker's work, you'll heard about stuff like that where they'll just give someone $1 million loan that's never paid back.
Uh-huh.
But anyways, Shackley asked for this $100,000 loan because Wilson had given a loan like that to his underling Klein's, and he turned down Shackley, so they decided to take his business and frame him for his being a rogue CIA agent, and he ended up in jail for decades. When he was spying for the CIA, and they told everybody that he wasn't working for the CIA.
And their man in Egypt was Mubarak, right?
Well, yes, Sadat was assassinated as part of this East Coast thing. They trained Sadat's security force, and then the security force assassinates them, and Mubarak takes over, and he was one of the ones that's he was bribing everybody for EATSCO, so he was a partner in this.
Uh-huh.
So the rise of Mubarak as part of this. And with Nuke in hand, you should also mention that they brought down the Australian Prime Minister earlier.
Oh, that's so right. Whitten or something? Was his name Whitley or Whitten?
Whitlam.
Whitlam, yeah. And, I think that factors in the movie The Falcon and the Snowman. I think that's part of the...
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I want to.
I think they're getting...
that's what inspired him, that's what inspired the guy to turn traitor, was when he found out, what they were up to in Australia.
Yeah, according to the movie, that's what happened. I remember seeing that he's getting the cables, and, he gets disillusioned. At least that's how the movie handles. I'm not sure if that's a true story or not, but that's supposedly, whatever. That's how Hollywood treated it, at least. But, now, of course, back to, so we're dealing with a 78, I guess it's, was it the fall of 78? Is that when the Shah abdicates? And there's a January 79 when the Khomeini comes to power. I'm not sure the time frame there, but roughly on that 78, 79 time frame.
Yeah.
But you're saying is that Khomeini, the revolution itself was something that I guess at least elements within the CIA or the American power structure wanted. They desired a revolution, and they desired Khomeini to come into power.
Well, they found out the Shah was dying in 1975, so they knew he was going to fall, contrary to popular belief, and they preferred Khomeini, who's at least anti-communist, to possibly a communist Iran or a nationalist Iran, and so it's better to have someone who talks tough and but won't work with the Russians. After Khomeini came to power, they gave him a list of all the communists in Iran, and Khomeini killed them all. And then he said, "I received a message from Allah." So usually for public stuff, he's calling America the Great Satan, but then when the CIA gives him a death list, all of a sudden they calls them a message from Allah.
Now, okay, so this is their way of sort of controlling the situation in Iran.
And yeah, it brings down Carter. It makes him look it makes him look weak and terrible.
Yeah.
He had no idea what was going on, and
yeah.
Reagan get into office.
Of course, with the hostage crisis. Now, there's another, because it was I think it was Kissinger who convinced Carter to take the Shah in. Remember, I think when he was going from country
on behalf of the Rockefellers, and the Rockefeller Bank was actually used to pay off the Iranians. They financed the arms deal, I found out through BCCI.
Really? And so Chase Manhattan Bank was involved in that?
Yeah.
And also Chase Manhattan Bank also benefited greatly from the hostage seizure.
Yeah, because they froze the Iranian money that Chase Manhattan Bank was holding, which is all the Shah's money, so they got to keep it basically for decades.
So I mean that's it makes you rethink the whole thing. And because if you don't think they're above doing that, they've done far worse than making hostages have to cool their heels for extra 60, 120 days, whatever it takes to make sure
they use these same Iranian fundamentalists to bring down Mossadegh back in 1954. So it's not that far out of it. Obviously they work with Al Qaeda now, so
yes, that's right.
Iranians are way nicer than them, so it's not surprising at all.
And you have this 8-year war between Iran and Iraq, and what this does is this puts Iraq in the debt, borrowing money from the Western banks to pay for this war, and also from the Gulf states, which I guess provides the pretext for the 1990 Gulf War, because the dispute between Kuwait and
that was masterminded by Bush, because he basically told Saddam, I don't care if you invade Kuwait. And then once he invaded Kuwait, that's where the term New World Order comes out of. It's we need to create this. We can't allow any country to invade another country. Ironically, it's Iraq. It's the poster child for this. And then they get this huge international coalition, the whole world, even Russia is united under American leadership, and it's we have entered World War IV, which is what I call the post-Cold War era. Of endless wars that we're still involved in now.
Oh man! So
Bush told him to invade, and the whole thing was manipulated. And Brzezinski was the one who told Saddam to invade Iran in 1980.
That's right.
So the whole thing was manipulated.
So now we have Shackley. He's here he is. He's with working for Bush and all this, and he also has connections to Donald Gregg.
Yeah, Donald Gregg had worked under Shackley in Vietnam, where Felix Rodriguez had worked for Donald Gregg, who was one of the infamous Cuban terrorists who's most famous for being there for the murder of Che Guevara. And it was a huge Iran-Contra figure.
Yeah, because his name came up. I was in some of these Henry Vincent's book about the D.C. Madam, a callboy operation, and he was the one caught using a credit card at his mortuary services, which is really a cover for a callboy operation. Donald Gregg.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, and this is what some of these, because what's weird is this
well, they say about Bush and
yeah.
And that's, Gregg was his national security advisor, his right-hand man.
Yeah, and also ambassador to South Korea,
involved in that kind of thing.
Yeah, wasn't he also involved in South Korea? He was the ambassador to South Korea, I think. But he's also
Yeah,
a CIA hand. But I'm saying this is how we get into some of these some of the more disturbing scandals, or the Franklin scandal, because, John DeCamp, he was a legislator in Nebraska who spearheaded that investigation. He was good friends with Bill Colby. And Bill Colby, in that book, DeCamp's book, Bill Colby, when he's investigating this stuff, and Bill Colby seems to be wise to it, kind of knows what's kind of going on. And he told DeCamp, according to DeCamp, they sat, 2 a.m. when we're having coffee in their kitchen talking about these things. He told DeCamp, he said, there's some things that you can't stop or do anything about. And this is one of them. Stop your investigation. Of course, the chief investigator's plane blew up, Gary Caradori, and said he had the goods on it. But this links back to the White House, Washington, Bush, Donald Gregg, but the investigation was then quashed. But this also links to Robert Gray, who was the Hill and Knowlton guy.
Interesting. That like Robert Keith Gray is one of these like fascinating power player. Like these are like the fixers behind the scenes. They're really.
He was very
people like him, Irving Davidson, William Pauley. Those are people we should be looking at. They're very fascinating.
But he was blackmailed. He was because he was big in like conservative Republican circles.
Oh yeah, he was gay.
He was homosexual, and so he was blackmailed. It was funny because his outfit Hill and Knowlton played a big role in promoting the Gulf War, the first Gulf War.
They're the PR firm for like
PR
the
firm.
incubator. Yeah, they're the ones that trained that girl to like how to lie to the world about incubator babies.
Yeah, the ambassador, the Kuwaiti
the ambassador's daughter. they pretend it was just some random girl. Shackley actually had this big deal. Like through Bush, he got this $21 million contract to build a warehouse in Kuwait during the 80s. It was like an interesting connection.
So this was probably Shackley got used to living
as one of his rewards,
living like a prince in Vietnam, driving chauffeured limousine, living in a palace, and then comes back home.
And he decides he decides he has to be rich now. Before that, he was like, I think it was for like up until the 70s, he was more motivated just by like he wanted to become director and like he was a true believer, but then he becomes more and more like greedy and he wants to make a fortune, and he did make a fortune.
Well, this has to happen because if you're like one of these guys, you're watching all this cash and all these drugs go in and out, and watching everyone else get rich doing it. Psychologically, it can be very straining on you because you figure, well, what about my retirement, right? And cops make this, crooked cops make this rationalization all the time, all this cash and just goes, and what if I just steal a little bit here and there and that sort of thing, and considering that the whole drug war is a fraud anyway, why it's easy to rationalize, these things. But Chris, get into Iran-Contra. Some of these scandals you mentioned, Shackley's is involved in some of these scandals we don't really hear about. You mentioned the Nugan Hand Bank. That it goes, how it was involved in funding some of these dirty operations around the world, paying for some of these black ops or civil wars, whether it's in Africa or Central America. His role in Iran-Contra. Now, most people think
all.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, just sorry. Finish. Sorry. Yeah, he was like the central figure in the Iran-Contra scandal because all like the people involved were all like what Daniel Jean called the secret team. Like they're all Shackley's friends, like Felix Rodriguez, Thomas Kleins, and like it had all evolved out of like the East Coast thing. It was like basically the company that Ed Wilson financed with his money that they chewed him out of. It was like what became known as the Enterprise, which is like this privatized, deniable military arms and drugs trafficking network.
And that's exactly what Oliver North called it, right? He called it the Enterprise, and off the shelf,
that's what Oliver North
off the
it.
books. Of course, when what we watched in the summer of '87, we heard about Contras and weapons and neat ideas, like as Oliver North referred to it, but we didn't hear much about the drug angle of it because that was later exposed by Gary Webb, right? Whose career didn't turn out too well.
It was known in the press at the time, but it was like they refused to cover it in Congress at all. There's a famous incident where two people went in there, and there's like, they held up a sign that said, "Ask about the cocaine, ask about the cocaine." Those people were sent to jail for a year.
A year? Really?
Yeah.
A year in prison for doing
They
that.
locked them up, and they didn't lock anybody who was dealing the drugs up, of course. Meanwhile, of course, they lock up like 500,000, I think in the 80s they only locked up 500,000 black people for, having a gram of cocaine while like they're like flying tons of it. It's just like so sick.
Well, the prison industrial complex needs those bodies to,
Yeah, it's all part of that. And slave labor.
Slave labor, filling the cells to meet the contracts, and this, Correction Corporation of America. That's all part of course, that, that's Bill Clinton was reinventing government and all that back in the 90s was a big part.
Well, yeah, with Bill Clinton, the standard rose to like 2 million from like the 500,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. And I heard a stat. It was like, I think the price per inmate went from like $8,000 to $24,000, or maybe I think maybe like even $100,000 is some huge amount. It's a big embezzlement wealth transfer scheme. Like it's like I guess like padding contracts for defense contracts. It's
Yeah, it's like all the industries that close down, they give those people jobs. Like they give the fired white workers jobs, like locking up all like the minorities.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's keeping Middle America going.
Yeah, you got to build another prison somewhere for the jobs. That's great. It's a great growth model you got there. Now, because the idea was in Iron Contra, the weapons were being shipped down to Central America, and of course planes come back. They don't come back empty, do they? And they would be. It was from what I understand, at least a big part of the operation was planes being flown into an airport in Mena, Arkansas, where they had a very compliant governor there who took his cut. Went into the Arkansas Development Corporation, But somehow a lot of the cocaine found its way into.
I've got a great story about the Mena thing.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
She went to Bill Clinton and told him all the details about like Mena and stuff, and then because he had so much information, he went to this other guy who's like blackmailed him. Basically, it's like, "I will cover up Mena if you let me be president." It's like that's how he became the president.
That's great. Oh, okay. Made his deal. Okay. This fueled the crack epidemic of the 80s and early 90s, which Gary Webb exposed in his series, in San Jose Mercury News, a Dark Alliance series. Right. And then he was hounded from journalism for it.
Well, obviously, yeah, it's totally disgusting because, like I said, it was exposed at the time. Like Robert Perry, for instance, had exposed it, and even like I'm obsessed with Iran Contra, so I read like the main book from the '80s, Out of Control, and they go into it completely. Mm-hmm. Like, and that's like Leslie Cockburn, so it's not even just like Robert Perry's kind of a rogue journalist.
Yeah.
And then so it's like they knew about it, and of course they knew about Alfred McCoy had written his book in the '70s, and they knew about all that.
Well, he was chased out.
They knew about the mafia. They knew all of it. Like the Cubans had been busted doing a massive drug ring in the '70s called in a DA operation called Operation Eagle. So they knew that the Cubans were a huge drug dealing army, and yet, despite the fact that they knew this whole 50-year history of CIA drug involvement, they decided to destroy Gary Webb's career and act like he was insane for telling what everybody already had known by the 90s.
Yeah. Well, at least those who bothered to read those books and articles, yeah. Because if it's not...
researchers. But, like, I mean, the media could have... What I'm saying is, like,
Yeah, the media was doing its job.
All the information was out there in the public record and stuff by the time he revealed it, and, like, they still destroyed his career, even though it wasn't that far-fetched at all.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to YouthLive.tv.